Welcome to the Seraphine Podcast. We are back with my good friend, Carrah Quigley. Hello, hello.
Hello.
I am so glad we did the first episode to kind of what I call dip the toe into the hot bath. Because you are a cooker, baby. You can bring the water to a boil. And what I love about you is that you're no holds barred, but you come to the table only wanting to share knowledge and to create conversation. You're definitely there to stir my own pot, and you give me permission every time of like, hey, you can step out, but guess what? It's still going to be cooking when you return to it. So
or the fact will still be a fact,
right?
Even if you disagree.
100%. So I want to go right into meat and potatoes. So when we first had our introduction with Carrah, we really were talking more about the friendship, how we met. But there's a whole nother story to Carrah. Carrah is a public speaker. She goes to all different kinds of formatted speaking. So whether it be like a panel, whether you're giving a speech. Have you debated before?
Not exactly, no. Okay. I mean, panel discussions can sometimes be debates, but that's not necessarily the format, just different points of view.
She really holds her own, and she's been asked, especially in a lot of religious organizations, to come and talk. Where else have you been asked to speak?
Parliament of World Religions, schools, also giving talks to educators, and secular organizations hire me. Secular gatherings, like people that don't do church but still want to gather, they've hired me. That's where I was able to travel kind of nationally. That's about it. I would love for more, certainly. I mean, I think that especially my talk that we're going to lead up to can be given to all people. But I would love more schools to hire me.
I'm just blown away. So if you're asking now, well, why are people asking her to come and talk? Well, her background, you have your master's, correct? And that's in world religion, or is it?
Basically. I mean, it's ecumenics. It's a master's of philosophy in ecumenics, and nobody knows what ecumenics is.
All right.
It's an old-fashioned word for basic, at the very basic thing is it's interfaith dialogue.
All right. You heard it here first, ecumenics, because that word may come out of my mouth one more time with her, but it's kind of like pedagogy with Dr. Auburn, where I was like, I have to look up that word again.
Yeah.
So ecumenics. And then on the other flip side, Carrah has a history that is based what most people refer to as tragedy, but she's really flipped the script on what she has brought in terms of educating people into the mind and into the, I don't know, what would you say of someone who not creates, because that's not creating. It is going into, I don't know. I mean, again, words like crime. Why am I going all C words right now? You have direct experience with someone who committed a crime.
Yeah.
So, and it's a big topic because it's about school shooters and violence. And the person that we're referring to is her father. So, heavy topics today. Definitely a little different from what we talked to before, but we're going to dive right in. And we're going to go into the first time you ever had to give a talk.
Oh, the first time I ever had to give a talk.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm really curious. And what was it about?
Well, the first time I really ever gave a lecture was on world religions, and that was fine. Little slideshow, PowerPoints. I'm still a fan of my PowerPoints. Yes. Then it got bigger, going to the larger secular organizations, giving talks on world religions, and then finally they said, "No more religion. Talk about whatever you want to." And then I gave the talk about my dad, and they were like, "Oh."
Wow. And how did you have the courage? First of all, I want to know how you even had the courage to bring that to the table.
People talk about bravery and courage with me all the time. And here's why I don't understand it. I think, yes, in one way I could be brave or courageous in that I'm going to stand in a room where I'm going to challenge people to think differently. And it's going to seem like I'm asking people to have sympathy for the devil, so to speak. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to look at your role in society. So the reason why I don't feel like I'm very brave and courageous is because what would you do if you had found out your father was a school shooter and then 5, 10, 15, 20 times a year, you're confronted with another school shooting? So I don't think about my bravery or courage in any way. I think about my country deeply. And I think about how every time there's a shooting, I go into this whole spiral, you know. Not as much now, but certainly back then, certainly with Virginia Tech. I mean, Virginia Tech was one of the worst. But I watch my country spiraling downward further into total denial, fear, and almost an apathy. And that there is no way to control what's happening. There's no way to stop what's happening. And I think that there is. It starts with gun control. I cannot get around that. You know, not everybody should have a gun. Not everybody should have the right to have a gun. You should pass a psychological profile. And had they done what they should have done with my dad, he would not have had access to firearms because he had already been in a mental institution and he had been discharged from the military for mental problems. So at that point right there, my father should not have been given a firearm.
So give me the backstory. Your father, he was in the war.
He was enlisted for the Korean War,
but
Korean War. Never left U.S. soil because he had been kicked out. His academic records were stolen by somebody trying to get into the Army. A little bit, you know, he had straight A's. He was magna cum laude from his high school. And my father didn't have the ability mentally to deal with that kind of setback. He was frustrated.
So he had thought his entire life he was going to join the military, and then he got a whole hard no?
I don't know that was a dream of his. I just know at that time, you know, it was the thing that you did. You signed up, you did your duty, and that was it. That was the culture he was in. He's small town working class. Now, he happened to be academic genius, but he will always talk about his struggle with being born into small town working class, and he just wasn't working class. He kept saying, he's like, my brain wasn't made for that, right? So he joined the Army, was too frustrated and discombobulated when his records were stolen, wasn't sure how to respond or react, and of course probably had some kind of reaction that then clued in people that, hey, this guy's not all there. So let's not enlist him.
Where do you think the fragility came from? Was it something that
I think it's a buildup of frustration from poverty. He was poor. I didn't have a father. His father abandoned him. And actually, once his father abandoned him, then whenever he saw him coming down the street, would cross to the other side of the street to avoid his son.
Wow. Wow. So he was in close proximity to his father?
And his father ignored him.
Wow.
And once he got remarried, then never basically interacted with my father.
That's devastating.
Yeah, didn't see my father again until the night he spent in jail.
Wow. So take me to, so he went to university and he became essentially like a proctor.
Yeah. So he was a room attendant.
Attendant.
So let me just go back a little bit because my dad's frustration comes from bullying.
Okay.
So at age 4 was his first incident of bullying. That's young. Okay. 4 is very young. His pants were pulled down in the middle of the street. All the neighborhood kids ran and laughed at him. And because it's a small town, the neighborhood kids are the same as the school kids. So there's no escaping. There's no, if you live in a big suburb, the kids that you go to school with aren't necessarily the kids that live in your neighborhood, right? So you have a break. You have some differences here. Doesn't happen with my dad. He's bullied at 4, bullied in elementary school, bullied up through middle school, junior high. And then the only reprieve he gets is at the Hill School, which is a very highly esteemed prep school in America. It happens to be in his own small town. So he never had to pay dorm services or anything. He got in full academic scholarship.
Wow.
Donald Trump's son went there. Oliver Stone went there. Harry Hamlin went there. I mean, all sorts of the upper crust of white society basically go to the Hill School.
Wow.
So he was the townie. He went to school, went home, and went to bed. Never stayed in a dorm. So he wasn't exposed to richer people in living situations. He was still somewhat isolated, right? And was not encountering bullying for the first time in his life. Spent an extra year in high school because he didn't feel he was smart enough, right? Magna cum laude twice.
Wow.
Okay.
That's insane.
Now, when I look back at my dad's life, I think he probably took that extra year of high school because he was too nervous about what lay ahead. I think he knew that he was going to be ending up in some kind of school which he was academically qualified for, but socially could not muster the courage, you know? So he gets into Swarthmore. And in Swarthmore, he finds the academic world he loves, but the social world that is crushing. I mean, these are elites. These are people that are way ahead of him socially and economically. And I mean, when we talk about white privilege, this is
The
This is
pinnacle.
way
Yeah.
it, you know.
Yeah.
Their mothers didn't work. You know, my grandmom, my father's mother, was a waitress her entire life. She was a single mom in the 1930s.
Wow.
So she struggled. I remember when my dad took me to all of his former houses, they moved a lot and he always lived above a shop. And I was like, that's really poor, Dad, you know, because I come, you know, my 3-bedroom ranch house in Tucson, you know, and he was like, well, this is what it was. He was born on a dining room table.
Wow.
You know, I mean, this
Yeah.
is what he grew up with. So he gets to Swarthmore, and these boys are rowdy. And I have confirmation from that from other people in the dorm. This is not just my dad's point of view. So I think for the longest time, I only understood my dad's point of view. And then as the years went by, I was able to get other points of view. But in the dorm, the boys were rough. They were athletes too. And they kind of... I mean, have you ever been to a boys' dorm?
Oh, I've heard. So my cousin actually went. He was from Iran, and he was in a British school, and he tells stories of the long tables and him at the end and them spitting in his food. I mean, like we're talking. I completely understand.
So my dad has stories about the dorm where there's like this sort of staircase that goes up and down as you go through the levels of the dorm, and he would go up the stairs to his room, and the guys would come up to the levels of the top of the stairs at each level and scream, Bechtel eat shit. That was his last name, Bechtel. Bechtel eat shit, Bechtel eat shit, Bechtel eat shit. Now, my dad says this as if it was a continuous thing. Who knows? It may have happened once or twice. In his memory, it's a
on
constant.
replay.
Right. So when you're bullied from a young age and your brain forms around the notion that anybody can attack you and there's nobody's going to stop it. Your brain becomes this idea of war. And anybody who's been bullied in school will tell you that's what it feels like. It feels like a war. You cannot distinguish between you and the person bullying you. It's the whole world bullying you. So by the time my dad gets to this dorm and these things start to happen, he can't figure out how to break out of this. And this is common for people who've been bullied. They're called whipping boy. There's the bully and the whipping boy. Whipping boys can't break out. And you know this, you've seen this. You know the guy that was bullied in elementary school, you see him still being bullied in high school. They can't break out of it, right? So 20% of our boys in America will get sucked into that and they won't leave that dynamic. Some of them will even take it into the corporate world. So basically things begin to escalate. My dad's in danger of losing his scholarship. His grades are crashing. He's about to break up with his girlfriend. There's just tons of chaos. And around the same time, this would be January of 1955, the boys pulled his mattress out of his dorm, took it into the quad and peed on it, and set his garbage can on fire. And other times they would grease up his doorknob. And, you know, to my father, an isolated person who's been bullied, it's not funny.
No.
He was never able to grasp the social teasing and things. I mean, if he had had a brother or a father, I think that would have helped. Because I think there's so many people that would have looked at all of this and said, that's just boys. And there's so many others of us in smaller numbers who would have looked at it and said, this is PTSD. And these boys are pushing your father into a place he can't return from. But of course, nobody knew that. So we planned a mass murder.
Wow. So he was at the time, how did he get the position as a proctor or the dorm monitor?
Because it was part of his scholarship. It's a work study situation.
So he essentially had keys to every single room.
Every single room.
And how did he have in terms of guns or anything that he had weapons? How did he have?
He was a hunter.
He was a hunter.
Right. When he lived in Arizona for a year. They went out to, my grandmother wanted to start her own cafe. So they moved to Bisbee. She was a business owner, owned her own cafe. And there's still old Bisbee postcards that have her cafe. I think it was called the Dinner Bell, I want to say. And there was an uncle that lived in Bisbee, so they went out there for a year. And sure enough, at some point, there's an incident with my dad in the Boy Scouts or whatever, and some guy starts messing with him on the bus, and then he's like, "Well, you have to leave, Mom." So he couldn't tolerate it, couldn't stay there. Now, good things happened in Arizona for him. I mean, he became an Order of the Arrow, which is way above an Eagle Scout, that kind of a thing, or the final step after an Eagle Scout. He was a leader in some ways, in some respects. There was good things, but they head back to Pennsylvania. And he ends up, I think then he completes high school, or he ended up, whatever it is, he gets to Swarthmore after that.
So
his guns, I'm sorry that we started about hunting. Yeah. He hunted a lot in Arizona.
Interesting.
And he also had extremely good aim. And the thing is that he could aim without looking.
That's insane. And he's also this intellectual
total intellect.
And sensitive person.
Extremely.
So to me, that's always so interesting when someone has innate ability to do something that's it's shooting and hunting. These are violent things, but it's also calculated. Like you need to think before you do. So what year was this? How
1955.
old was he?
He was 22.
He was 22. So he was almost graduating out of his, was it no?
No, he was sophomore in high school. Remember he took, or sophomore in college. Remember he took the extra year and then he had the Army.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that makes sense. So what was the trigger? How, when he talked to you, did he say?
I believe it was the fire of the garbage can and the peeing on the mattress. But remember, when it comes to the snapping, it's not so much about the final incident as it is about the last 6 months to a year, right? Because you've got that whole buildup, but it's that last year of the not getting heard. You know, I truly believe every school shooter is a sensitive boy. Yeah. That's been shoved down and neglected. And so what they have to reflect out to the world then is the way they think they've been treated.
Yes. I completely agree.
And so you understand then the war mentality. They will create war because they've been shown the world is war based on their experience with bullying. Did
he have like forethought planning, or did he just go get the guns?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, premeditated to me seems like a longer period of time. I know there's a legal definition of premeditated versus the word definition, but I think he probably had the thought, and certainly in elementary school, he's painting pictures of killing people, which any teacher now would look at differently.
Of course.
But to now, for little boys, it's cloaked in aliens or what was it, cowboys and Indians kind of a thing. It's always cloaked. Yeah. So I think he'd been thinking of like, I'm going to take them all out. Like at some point this happens, maybe 6 months. But again, it's not a calculated thing. It's a thought. It's a thought. But he works himself up into a state of temporary insanity. And he drives home, gets all of his guns.
Wow.
All of them. 2 revolvers and I think 4 rifles. Wow. Gets long strings of ammunition and straps them over his body. Now remember, he's driving home something like 20 miles or 40 miles, whatever it is, from Swarthmore to his small town outside of Philadelphia, somewhat, Pottstown. And then he drives back. And the whole time he's singing hymns. And I think he's singing Almighty Fortress is Our God. And he comes home. His mother's just baked a coconut cake, gives him a slice of cake as he walks out with his guns. And she says, "What are you doing with all those guns?" And he says, "I need money. I'm going to sell them." And we did a documentary about this, and it's interesting when they did the reenactment of this, and you see the guy coming down the stairs with a coconut cake strapped with guns. It's the most odd thing. You can't imagine how strange that is. You're going to go kill the entire dorm, and you've got a coconut cake in your hand. And I kept asking, what did you do with the coconut cake? And he's like, I put it in the front seat. And then all my guns in the back seat. And the reason why I focus on the coconut cake is like, isn't there anything that'll snap you back to reality? Yeah. Your loving mother gives you a piece of coconut cake and you're going to go kill 50 people.
Yeah.
And it's just so strange. I mean, this person raised me, and I've had to confront this other person that did this horrible thing. And so he drives back to the dorm. And he basically, he crisscrossed the ammunition, just like you see in all the movies. And this is before even the genre existed of school shooter, you know?
Yeah.
And he just walks in with his guns, and he cannot figure out who to kill first. He has no idea. And this begins the process of, what am I into? And he walks up and down the hallway, and finally he stops at a door. This must have been 2 a.m., 1 a.m., January 17th, 1955. So it's cold. There's a dorm room with a poster that says "The Brains in the Pawn." And he remembers the guy in that room saying, "You see, Bechtel, I'm the brains and you're the pawn."
Oh, fuck.
So he picked that door, opens it up, and he shoots into the dark. He sets the flashlight on top of the side table, shoots into the dark, and he immediately knows he killed somebody. And he says then a hand grabbed around his heart and squeezed it tightly and held it, and then it let go. And he said, I can't do anymore. And so he releases his ammunition out of his gun. He shoots his gun down the hallway. Now, until I met the men in the dorm, so for like almost 15 years, 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years, I'm thinking what my dad thinks is that no one woke up, because he thought no one woke up because nobody came out into the hallways. Turns out everybody was awake when they heard the first shot. And they stayed in their rooms because they were all afraid they were going to get shot because they heard the bullets whizzing past their dorm room. So he discharges his ammunition and then goes and finds a friend in another dorm and wakes him up and says, I've just killed somebody and we have to go to the police. And so they walk to the police department.
Wow.
Now at this time, my father's still in his state of insanity, and while he's confessing, he's saying all sorts of strange things. And then he gets put in jail, and he watches at this time, he spends the time in jail during his trial, and he watches two men take the final walk to the electric chair. And he talks about how one went completely silently and the other went fighting the whole way. And so as I learned this about my father at 19 and I start thinking about those things, you think about, have you ever seen somebody take the final walk of their life? And you think about how that affects somebody and what they observe. And you think about that the rest of his life, he now has to carry the burden and the thought that he killed somebody and destroyed a life and destroyed the whole family's life. That mother, the father, the brother, they'll never be the same.
No. How long was he in prison for?
Okay, so he went to trial, and they found that he was incurably insane and found to be insane and he was sentenced to life. So at this time, there was not the temporary insanity that he actually ended up with in terms of going on the record. So he gets sentenced to life, and he's incurably insane, and he goes to Farview Mental Hospital in Waymart, Pennsylvania. It's up in the Poconos for the rest of his life. And when he gets there, it's hell. The entire top floor, everyone is completely naked. It's the suicide watch. There are tons of mentally ill people that are also physically handicapped. There are people that are so drugged that they're just in a stupor. My father was never given any drugs. And he was sort of, I want to say, not suddenly, but after a few months, they recognized he's not that mentally incapacitated. That something had happened that made him snap, but he's functioning normally now, and they couldn't figure out what to do. So he requested some work, and they were like, well, whatever you want. So his dad was a printer, and he saw all the old printing equipment in the basement of the prison. So he restarts the print shop and opens the print shop and starts printing all of the material for the local people. Business cards, ladies' luncheons, lawyers and cops' business cards.
Oh my
starts
God.
printing all the material. Starts printing the material for one of the only prison AA groups in the country. And they actually become the largest AA group in prison. My dad attends all the meetings, even though he barely touched alcohol, but he loved the 12-step program. He writes a whole paper about the history of the Serenity Prayer, which was written by Reinhold Niebuhr, and AA won't publish his history of the Serenity Prayer because he's never been an alcoholic. But they appreciate his work, and I still have the typed thing from AA from New York City, the typed letter, page and a half, that says, we appreciate your work, but if you're not an addict, we can't publish you, but keep going, you know. Then he starts a school. He teaches science, he teaches history, he teaches reading, he taught math, and he basically becomes the teacher there. And now he had typical prison struggles as well. Constant attempts at rape, constant beating people off, constantly trying to beat people up. But in this way, he conquers the bully.
So that blows. And how many years? So talk to me about. He's in a mental hospital that's within a prison.
It's both.
It's both.
It's a prison for the criminally insane.
Okay, and then he's there for how long?
4 years and 9 months.
4 years and 9 months, and then is he up for he wasn't up for parole?
No.
So how did he?
I mean, this is a capital murder.
Yeah.
So, well, he wasn't accused of murder. He was. I don't know what the sentence was, but I always know that I'm like, you murdered somebody, and he's always like, not the legal definition of it.
I gotcha.
So we can say that as in terms of lay terms, right? Because I would call it a murder.
Yeah.
It's a murder. But legally, he was never found guilty of murder. And that's something I had to learn to accept, that people will hold on to their legal definitions for reasons, you know?
Yeah, I understand.
So he gets counseling, doesn't receive medication. One diagnosis he got was schizophrenia, which he wasn't. All sorts of other things about paranoia, which he isn't. Nobody knew anything about bullying back then, or PTSD even wasn't talked about. You know, we haven't even had the Vietnam War yet. So.
I'm so surprised they didn't pump him up with drugs.
No, I mean, everybody is too. Now they suggested a lobotomy. So lobotomies were big back then, and they were going to give him a lobotomy. They said, look, if we just take out this front part, you know, he'll never kill anybody again. There won't be any violence. And that was the route to take, right? Because they were convinced he would be violent again. And my grandmother refused.
Well, thank God for that.
She knew his mind.
God.
She knew his mind. She knew that he had a mind. And if all he had was a mind, then she said, I got to let him have it. Same thing she did with her daughter. Her daughter, who I think was probably autistic, they always called her slow. She was up for sterilization. And my grandmother said, I will not take away the one thing she can do.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me because my fascinations not only with cults and mind control, but I've been reading more and more because of the fact that I am in therapy, and I look at mental illness and wellness, what people have done in years past. And the brain lobotomies always fascinated me. I don't even know how damaged your brain it blows my mind.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, the pills back then, and just to incapacitate someone, just to get him out. He must have made a huge impression on the people that were overseeing or caretaking him to not be tranquilized. I mean, I would think that would be the easiest thing to do back then.
But he wasn't violent.
That's so interesting. And he was bringing, it sounds like he was creating an environment within the people who were in the hospital, which was positive.
Yeah. So eventually he's in his counseling sessions with the what are they called, clergy, what are they, chaplain, and it's with that chaplain that they decide to start negotiating a possible release. And I found the letter my dad wrote to the warden saying, you know, what can we talk about here about securing my release? And you know, I also have just found all of my dad's writings from prison. And they stack like almost 2 feet high. And there's these little folded up pieces of paper where we learned that he became obsessed putting things in his pocket because it must have been from the prison uniform that had a pocket.
Yeah.
So he would always put things, we always had to get shirts with him with pockets. And it must have come from this habit from the prison because he would fold up pieces of paper like this, like business card size, and he would write and fill up that side, flip it over, fill up the other side, and then fold again and fill up all the sides. So when you unfold the paper, it's all of his different thoughts in squares around. But that was the way he must have been able to write during the day as he's doing other tasks, you know, because everybody has a job that they do, you know.
That's so fascinating. So as you're retelling this part of the story, how many times have you actually told the story of your father?
30, 50 probably.
each time that you tell it, does it ever get easier?
So the hardest part of telling this story is either recounting when he told me or when I have to say in my speech that I'm the daughter of a school shooter. I'll never, ever be able to ease that sentence because it was not my identity growing up until I was 19. So all of my brain formulation, puberty, everything about how this chemistry grew did not have that reality. And then the reality gets unleashed at 19.
So you were born, I was born 77.
74.
74. So he was released 4.5, 5 years.
So 1961.
1961. What did he have to answer to be acclimated back into society?
Okay. So first of all, they have to redraw up the Insanity Commission. I mean, they obviously have to find out, they have to assess him. So then once the assessment happens and there's really nothing left of this demon or person that committed this crime, which I know from other school shooters that are in prison now. These are the ones from, pre-Columbine and post-Columbine that just, they had either killed one or two people. They're in jail or they lived, let's put it that way. Not many school shooters live for good reasons. They also don't have the insanity anymore. And so I'm not saying this happens with all school shooters, and I'm not saying all school shooters are not sociopaths. I'm sure, a good portion of them are, and they need to stay put away.
Yes.
But there's a number of them that encounter this phenomena of bullying. It messes with their head and their chemistry and biology. And when they commit the crime, then that whole chemistry somehow gets released. And they are aware of their crime and their problem and what they have done, and they stop. It's not uncommon. It's not all of them. I always want to caution that because people are like, "Whoa, let's let them all out of jail." Then I'm like, "Nope,
no, because rehabilitation is not for everyone."
And prisons aren't very good at rehabilitation, as we've discovered in the last 25 years. So, it's the idea that I'm the daughter of a school shooter. I'm related to that I continue to have extreme white privilege because my father would not have gotten out of jail if he was black.
100%.
And then he goes on to meet this amazing woman who's my mother. And he tells her on the third date.
Wow.
And she loves him. And she said, I knew that the person that committed that crime and that took that other person's life wasn't in that person anymore. And then, 20 years after my dad is released, or 15 years after my dad is released, I'm born. And he was told upon his release to never mention it.
And what was the rationale behind that?
So he was found to be temporarily insane. So that was the actual sentence, was temporary insanity, which happens.
No, it does.
And I remember before I found out, it was right before the Nicole Brown Simpson, O.J. Simpson trial was going to happen. And I was like, oh, I bet O.J.'s going to plead temporary insanity. Like that's not,
Yeah.
And then I remember like a few months later finding out about my dad and thinking, oh, well, I have to believe temporary insanity exists now.
Yeah.
Because my dad wouldn't lie. I mean, he just wouldn't. So, where were we? My mom found out, they get married, they have me, and he was told never to mention it. And because he was never found guilty of a felony, he doesn't have to put it on any of his applications or anything. And he just basically gets released and goes to Susquehanna University, gets a 4.0, and then gets his master's and PhD at KU.
That's so fascinating to me because it's almost like it disappeared from his life for a little bit. And I don't know how someone can compartmentalize that. And I give your father a lot of credit to be able to raise a daughter, in the back of his mind, this being something that I'm sure once he sat down clearly haunted him for the 19 years of his life.
Yeah, I'm part of that redemption for him. The way he raised me and loved me, the way he created another human being and let it live and breathe, to create a new life after taking a life, I think is part of his redemption, part of his sorry. And I asked him, I'll never forget, we're driving down Rock Hill. He's coming to visit me. He's sitting in the back. We're going to pick up my daughter at school. And I said, Dad, how did you get over it?
Yeah.
How did you do it? He said, I didn't. You never get over killing somebody. It's with you all the time. But you cannot give up your life when it's been given back to you and do nothing except whine and complain and live in that sorrow. You are no good if you live in sorrow. And he said, so the only thing I can do is to keep going, to keep living, to keep doing the right thing. I mean, my father, this is going to sound funny to all the people that were terrorized by him, because that entire dorm was terrorized by him. My dad was a saint, helping the Central American refugees for that critical period in the 80s, helping to hide them all over the country, to keep them away, to keep them safe from being sent back and tortured and killed in El Salvador. The way that he cared for me and my sister and my mother, the way that he would give $20 bills and $100 bills to every person that he could find homeless on the street, the way he donated his time and money to help people all the time. I mean, his Central American refugee volunteerism was extraordinary.
Redemption is something that I find to be, I wish more people would talk about redemption. A lot of people talk about shame. A lot of people talk about processing trauma, living in your guilt. And I do believe that redemption is something that is this beautiful guiding force to rehabilitation. And when I heard you tell me the story of how you found out, it seems like he had already been through his course of redemption. But why do you think he told you at age 19 when he did?
Because he had a heart attack. And he was in the hospital with my mom in Pennsylvania. And he said, we got to tell the girls, because if I die, I can't leave that to you. And I can't have her find out from somebody else. Because I didn't know, the whole family knew.
That's
my dad's whole family. I mean, I went to family vacations and family reunions. Nobody said a word. The whole town knew.
Did you have a sense of, like right off the bat, was your emotions completely like how, like, was it anger? Was it
total
confusion?
devastation?
Devastation.
Total betrayal.
Yeah.
Total devastation. Life devastation. How dare you? I mean, I believed in God at the time, so I was very angry at God. Spent a lot of time angry at God. How dare you bring me into the world, let me live 19 years, only to know by some dramatic irony that the other shoe's going to drop someday. You knew the whole time this was going to happen to me. Fuck you, you know? And then to my dad, I was like, how do you raise somebody knowing you're going to break their heart one day? I mean, why would you do that? Why would you bring me into the world, be such an amazing father, and then one day say, hey, sorry to break your heart entirely, but I got to tell you something. You know, that's for a long time, I was in a lot of resentment and anger because of the total betrayal.
Did you not talk to him for a while?
No, I did. We were always open and talked about it. Now, I probably had things that I kept, and he would know that I would do that. I mean, he said this is a natural process. I think what really bothered me at the time was, okay, we're going to tell you this, now don't tell anybody.
That one is, I don't get. I have a hard time with it. I've shared with you about my dad talking to me about his ALS. My whole family knew before me and my sisters knew. And then it was, well, don't talk about it. And I'm like, don't talk about it.
Right.
I mean, it's like you're going to dump this in my lap and I'm not supposed to process this. What do you feel like he could have done better with telling you? And what did he do?
Here's the name of the
exactly
counselor that I trust that knows my story.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
But he could not have known who is in this situation that is a child of a school shooter. Name them. Give me the list.
No.
Give me the list of people I can call.
No.
The only children of school shooters that I know about in this world are the children of Nickel Mines, the man who killed the Amish girls in the Amish schoolhouse. Okay. He had children. And I want to meet those kids, and I would love to set them free if I could from any guilt they may have.
Yeah.
Now, they were alive when he committed his crime, so it's a little different. But, you know, when your father takes a life and you have your own, it makes you feel super guilty and shameful. And it makes you feel like you really aren't sure if you've earned the right to live the life. And so my process ended up being 20 years of complete and total self-hatred. To the point where I did not feel I should exist at all.
When's the first time you actually walked into an office of a therapist to talk about what happened?
First time I ever told a therapist about what happened would have been in my... Actually, not until I was in my 40s. So the 2 counselors I had at the time, I never told them this story.
Why?
So there's a number of reasons why. Okay. So sometimes it had to do with, well, if they know, then they're going to tell somebody, and then that somebody's going to tell the president of the U of A where my dad was at, and then my dad will get fired. Right. All sorts of weird things you think in your head, even though the case is done.
Yeah.
Also, it's too much. How do you process? I mean, how in the world do you process that? Now, my reality is driving from Tucson to Phoenix, there's Flowing Wells Prison, and you see all the prisoners out working the fields. I'm related to those people now.
Yeah.
I'm related to the people in the uniform. I'm related to the people that people are terrified of. I'm related to the people that nobody wants to have anything to do with. I'm related to the people that they send to get singed in the electric chair. I'm related to those people. What do you do with that? So I sit putting on my makeup and moving to New York and my little acting career. I mean, what good is that going to do for me? Is that a life worthy of a life that's been lost? This is my logic for 20 years.
So as we move forward with this knowledge of your father, I'm interested to know about what and how your life, like what it impacted, how you pivoted in a way that if you had not known this, what you think it enhanced or brought to your life. Like, all right, this actually has made me a better person, diving deep into it versus, I don't know, speculating what might have happened if you didn't find out from your father, from his words, from his mouth.
Well, it bifurcated my world. I had the world I existed in and functioned in, and yes, how do you do? And thank you very much. I'll wipe my ass. I'll close the doors. I'll start the car. I'll stop at stoplights. That's the life, right?
Yeah.
We're there. But the undergird of all that, the other side of it all is, holy shit, there's a lot of guns in the country.
Yeah.
And holy shit, there's no mental health care. And holy fuck, we're leaving our men behind. And holy shit, this is happening a lot. And I've got this story. And so I literally cooked inside with a lot of resentment and shame and self-hatred inside of myself for like close to 20 years while I watched our country continue to deal with this, have no solutions, roll over and start again. And the numbers kept ticking up. You know, I mean, when Columbine happened, my dad, the first thing he said was, this was preventable. And I said, you know, they succeeded at what you wanted to do. And he said, yes, they did.
Wow.
And then you start to see it happen again and again and again. So, you know, I feel like I'm cooking most of the time because I've got this knowledge. But if I tell people I'm related to a murderer, they're going to hate me and they're going to want nothing because our impression of prisoners and everything else is ew. Yeah. And so I thought the stain was on me all the time.
Well, the stain isn't on you. And I sure as hell like you. And listeners, we're part 2ing this conversation. This is just the beginning. We're going to pause right here, right now. And the next episode will be just in a day or two that you're going to get the second half of what is the story for Carrah? What has she done with her life now? She is somebody who has influenced my life in a great deal over a short period of time. Her friendship, her clarity, when I come to her with problems, there's not very many people that I can compare to. And what I want is for you to be able to sit back on the second episode and see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So when we're talking about the Seraphine podcast and this weight of dark and light, it's unavoidable. We have darkness, we have light. It's what we lean into. And what I love about you is that you leaned into understanding the darkness and bringing that knowledge to light of where we go from here with these dark circumstances, what leads people to them, and how we as a community can help each other so that we can avoid another one of our sons being in the same position.
And all of our students being able to go to school safely.
Yes. Well, like, subscribe, and click in a day or two to the next episode with Carrah Quigley. Thanks so much.
Thank you.